So, the talk today, from illusion to reality, is obviously the topic of the whole conference. Some simple ideas in living the spiritual life. Many of us, I think, come to summer school to learn more about the structure of the universe and the meaning of life, especially for ourselves, so that we may be happier than we currently often are. We're pulled by an inner restlessness and hardly understood sense that there is much more to being alive than commonly experienced. And we come into contact with an huge array of religious and spiritual teachings and methods, and then are often really quite confused. It often seems therefore important to keep things as simple as possible, and thus you will almost certainly have heard most things before. In fact, there's nothing really new in the universe. It's the putting into practice on a daily basis that, of course, is the tricky bit. I always seem to find myself starting with the tools with which we have to work ourselves. And so I like to look at the constitution of mankind from our teachings, which always seem so helpful to build the structure. I'm sure you'll be familiar with it, but to summarize and to put it into context, we go about life in our physical bodies, which are organized by the etheric double energy field. We're willing to undergo surgery and have parts removed, but we do not see that we've lost our identity. The emotions are very powerful and can drive us to do and say things we enjoy or regret. Often we think they are us. We're swayed by them. But if we look at the case of an actor who produces emotions to order, depending on the part to be played, we can see that he can change those emotions depending on the thoughts and perceptions of the situation. Then we come to our lower minds, the busy monkey mind as it's often called. We have it filled with thoughts throughout life. The lower mind, though, is a bit like a computer. What you put in is all that you can get out, but no more. And therefore you'll never be able to understand the divine through thought, because it doesn't come from what you put in that way. You won't be able to understand the divine through thinking of philosophy or theology. Most of you probably have had the experience that when you sit to meditate or revise for an exam, almost immediately the mind is thinking of anything other than the topic that you have decided on. But you decided to study. It is obvious, therefore, that you are not this monkey mind. Then, who are you? That is the question. The question. So when we quieten this mind, when we meditate, or are enraptured by beauty, suddenly there may be a sense of peace, of love, a oneness with all life. We may have a special insight about something. Many scientists make their discoveries in this way. We may suddenly know what to do or say in a situation. Our teachings call this the higher mind and beyond the intuition, where all life is experienced as love and unity. And even beyond those, if we're talking about layers, as it were, or levels, is the Spirit, ultimately one in the divine. And in Sanskrit, these are called Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, as you will know. The part of humanity made in the image of God. St. Paul summarizes it by saying we are a spirit, soul, and body. Although it's probably easier, I find more helpful, to call the third aspect the personality, rather than just the body. So the soul, using that term, of higher mind, intuition, and part of spirit, takes on a personality at each birth. It takes on a new lower mind. It takes on emotions, etheric and physical matter. And then we believe this personality to be me. And at what we call death, we let it go again. But as we've already shown, when we quieten the usual me of mind, we are still present. So therefore, we are a soul inhabiting a personality. We are a being not subject to time, having an earthly experience. And this is so much the reverse of how we normally think. It is the only way of making sense of our own evidence, if this is our evidence. And this is absolutely the key to understanding the spiritual life. So I'll return to this shortly. Now, what about illusion? I'm sorry I missed yesterday's lecture stuck on the M5, but let's look at the question of illusion. The Theosophical Society is one of the first to bring Eastern teachings to the West, and I think the idea of illusion to describe most of the physical world was quite a shocking concept. It was around through Plato, and through him the Western world also knew this in a slightly different language. He used the image that what we see is but shadows cast on the wall of the cave, and we believe that to be reality. The idea that all of this physical world and all our thoughts and emotions are just illusion seemed surprising, really. It suggests that they're not real. And yet in daily life they seem very real enough, often painfully so. So what does this mean? How can we make sense of the experience of daily life and its tribulations and joys? Illusion also means that things are not what they appear to be. Now that is already a difference. On the physical plane, we know now that all material is made of atoms. These are essentially space held together by the electronic charge between positive nucleus and orbiting electrons. Of course, there are other subatomic particles now to be understood too. Einstein, of course, went further to say that everything in the universe is energy. It just depends on the frequency of vibration as to how it manifests. He incidentally had Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine in his library. And so we can say that the reality of this physical world depends on the level at which you perceive it. Now that's a very important point. How you perceive something, because perception is not neutral. Ourselves we see and we hear with our eyes and our ears, and obviously taste and touch. We receive in sensory inputs. But it is the brain that has to make sense of them, to interpret them. We actually see with our brains, not with our eyes. And this it does through the filter of our previous experience and beliefs. It's an incredibly important point. What we see and hear is through the filter of what we already think and expect. And so at this point we already start to create our own reality. In physics 2, light is either a wave or a particle, which are supposed to be impossibly to be the same thing. It depends on how you observe it. And there are subatomic particles that behave differently when there is an observer. And again, another simple example is being at a gathering such as this, or at a party. To hear what your friend standing next to you is saying, you have to focus very carefully. Suddenly you hear your name mentioned in the distance, and your attention is drawn over there. No longer can you hear what your friend is saying, because you're listening to, what are they talking about over there? So now what you hear is what you pay attention to. So again, what you pay attention to creates your reality. Another example of a change of reality in the same appearance is, of course, ourselves. Bodily, we appear much the same in form, but sometimes we may be difficult and destructive in our behaviour, and other times we may be kind and loving. The more important reality of who we are is now different, even though the form appears much the same. So crucially, the difference in our behaviour can be as the result of growing up and choices we make. We can choose to be pleasant, or we can choose to be destructive. We can choose to be loving. And so we have the power to change our reality. We have the power to change our reality. So illusion or levels of reality vary according to your point of observation. There are layers in layers, like a Russian doll or an onion. And the only ultimate reality is the source from which this all manifested. And the source, or absolute, is before creation, in a sense. It is all and nothing. No thing. Just being. Why might the source create these layers of manifestation or illusions? Why at all? Possibly for the fun of it. To grow. To discover more of its infinite potentiality. Let's understand that a little bit more. One of the deep sayings of the ancient mysteries, as you will know, is as above, so below. It's a very great key, actually. We can understand as above from what we are below. So let us see what the human condition may help us to understand. I think most of us here as humans like a challenge. Life would be boring otherwise. And we often create new opportunities, new things to work at, because it is a challenge. It tells us something about ourselves. Difficulties can uncover our strengths, help us to develop new approaches and new ideas to create. And life circumstances may well be unconsciously created by us, so we can better see who we are, what our strengths and our weaknesses are, because they're not immediately visible to us. You can often see that life events and other people show us what we need to see if we dare to look. They are like mirrors, enabling us to see an image of ourselves. I think it's fairly well known now, the idea that what we see in others of like or dislike resonates with the qualities in ourselves that we dislike or like in us. How can you recognize something if it doesn't resonate with something in you? How do you know what love is unless you know what love is? How can you see it? And so life and others, to repeat, can be a mirror of what we need to see about ourselves and help us to grow. So that is the below, perhaps, useful for our own daily lives. So as above, maybe the source too, in its wish to grow, creates therefore mirrors of layers of apparent reality or illusion with which to see itself better, consciously. Because in our daily lives, as well as in the greater scheme of things, in the detail of difference in time and space, if you really focus on the uniqueness of any moment of time and space, the essence of its being is revealed and evolved. And so creating time and space produces the opportunity to discover essence. And so maybe the source wishes to do that too. So, the spiritual life. Everything is created from the one, the source. And that, of course, includes us as humans. We are already, therefore, of the divine nature. Atman is both universal and human. But this great truth is forgotten as we descend into incarnation and take on this personality with its lower mind believing itself to be separate. We're taken over by our mind, which wants us to believe it is who we are. And it will do anything to keep us thinking that. It will distract us, it'll create problems to be solved and dramas to be played. It may even kill to defend its image of itself. The mind can be a very great tool, for with thought we create and focus, and energy follows thought. But we must not allow it to use us, which is in fact our common condition. Because then it is the creative illusion for us as human beings. As a Zen master observed, the problem for humanity is that it is lost in thought. We're constantly befuddled with thoughts rushing around all the time, going nowhere and of not much use. And if we find, like in meditation, that we try and focus, the mind, as we approach silence, will fight back. Madame Blavatsky, in The Voice of the Silence, famously said, "The mind is the slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer." And also, the way to final freedom is within yourself, and that way begins and ends outside the personal self. As I've already said, thought filters what we perceive. Thought also creates the story of our lives and creates our identity. It's a very important point in various therapies, is that we rewrite, co-create a new story about ourselves. Our beliefs and expectations dictate what we see and create. They may well create, as I say, the circumstances of our lives. And we may create those initially by the choices we make for this incarnation, what we wish to experience and learn. But thought is only another rate of vibration of the energy of the created universe. It's just another rate of vibration. It's all we are. We have already seen that what we pay attention to is, for that moment, our reality. And even more importantly, we choose what we attend to. So, to repeat, we have the power to change our reality. And the spiritual life is about changing that reality, raising our vibratory rate to another of our choosing. It usually means silencing the noise of the lower mind, or perhaps rising above it, or perhaps transmuting it to a place of peace and oneness of the Buddhic and higher planes. The spiritual life is the plane of the one life. It is a bit like retuning to a new radio station. What we listen to exists for us at that moment, and others may not exist anymore. And this is one reason why many people have no interest in the spiritual life, because they've never ever tuned into it, don't know its existence, and therefore it is not for them at that time a reality. That we can choose, knowing that it does at least exist. Now, it suggests that the essence of all religions is this shift to beyond the lower mind, the personality, to the soul, to the spirit, the beingness of who we actually are. That is all what religion and the spiritual life is about, is to consciously know who you are. And as we know, there are very many ways offered to us to do this. Meditation, prayer is a way of deliberately tuning to other than myself a lot of the time. Mantra, serial-led meditation in action, better known as ritual, is thousands of years old as an effective method of tuning in to something than our personalities and reflecting and linking in with the essence of the universe. Appreciating nature, and most importantly, living a kind and good life. Patanjali describes various approaches to union or yoga through many different paths, as you will know, such as devotion, bhakti, or study, jnana, or action, karma, etc. And the language and the transmitting stories will vary according to our teachers, our culture, and ourselves. But the essence remains the same. And therefore, they can all be effective. However, a moment's reflection shows that often our underlying assumption is that we humans are rather frail and unspiritual. We have to strive to become holy or better or initiated. Probably we'll never quite be good enough, really. We'll try, we'll aim to reach the level of the masters. Perhaps in some long distant future life it'll happen, and we might even aim to become one in the divine. But it'll all be terribly hard work. And from the perspective of our ordinary humanness, that may be true, especially if that is the reality we create for ourselves. It is the perspective of humans looking up towards the divine, the triangle, if you like, of aspiration of the six-pointed star. But the other triangle of the six-pointed star is pointing downwards, the source manifesting. And from this source all is created, including ourselves, as we've said. So therefore, reminding ourselves, we are a being from source. We are part of its nature. Our personal Atma or spirit is one with the great Atma or divine. This our teachings are clear about, but we find it hard to believe or act upon. C.W. Leadbeater, an early theosophist, said, "We are a spiritual being having an earthly experience." I've repeated it. "You are the light you seek" is a summary of many ancient teachings. And Tattvamasi from the Ishvara Upanishad, "I am that am I." Nelson Mandela quoted, it's quite a famous quote of course, but it was actually from Marianne Williamson from A Return to Love, Reflections on the Principles of A Course in Miracles. I quote, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us, it is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others." It's the end of the quote. And so we can begin to identify ourselves with the qualities of Source, all the virtues, with love, truth, beauty, goodness, omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, as the essence of who we are. We can identify as a son of God, not as our personality, which would be a very great mistake, but as we really are in essence. We can know ourselves as trying to bring the divine qualities to this earthly planet. Caroline Corey, founder of Omnium Healing and consciousness teacher, wrote along the same lines: I am infinite, I am love, I remember. Remembrance allows you to explore and perceive yourself as a particle of a bigger and more evolved consciousness. While the actual experience may take different forms, it is most likely a powerful, highly emotional and profound experience of oneness with Source, Creator, and the cosmic mind of the universe. It is a sort of merging with the force and intelligence that created all that is. And through this blending, there is a strong and infallible recognition of being one with the universe. It is the ultimate recognition of our divine self as a pure essence of divine creator source. It's the end of that quote. It is the same terms as the mystics of all ages in all religious traditions. And we can connect to our source when we're again in our human state. We can ask and intend, very important two words to use, to do so, visualizing a beam of light which is ourself, the beam from the one bright light of Source coming down through us to this earth. And as a spark of Source, we can create and manifest these realities on lower planes. As Caroline Corey again says, if we are to create heaven on earth, then the starting point must be heaven, Source, not earth. Thus we rise above the illusions of mind and are not caught up in them. There are two practical themes that I'd like to just put before you again in daily life that make these effective connections, both of which you would almost certainly know already, but I think are worth repeating because they simplify things so much. And the first is love, and the second is the eternal now. Familiar to you, I'm sure, but briefly, it is possible to see all things, all so-called negative emotions as forms of fear. Jealousy, anger, if you trace them back, come out of fear. Fear of what? We can make a list as long as you like. But the bottom line, the underlying fear, is often one of not being good enough. Not enough for yourself, for your parents, others, God. And fear is a demand for love to fill our emptiness and inadequacy. Maybe I'm okay after all. But it is a taking from others and from life. Whereas love is a giving, and extending oneself for the spiritual growth of another. Thus we can say there is only love. It's either giving or demanding, full or empty, if you like. But this makes it much easier to identify our emotions and therefore not be dragged about so much by them. And once we can see them for what they are, we can recognize the fear and start to translate it into love, or at least acceptance. And as we do so, as we see what our emotions and thoughts are doing, because they work in tandem, we can choose. We can choose to give love or to stay in the fear. Your power is restored. And we are told, of course, that God is love. And when you think about it, there is no difference between the love of God and human love. And since we're all part of Source, how could there be? It is a direct line connecting heaven and earth, the layers of illusion and ultimate reality. In loving we manifest the divine on earth. The spiritual life is flowing. We divinize matter. Similarly, we may prefer to choose another simple line, and that's to live in the now, as Eckhart Tolle so easily explains. Most of the time our minds are thinking of the past or anticipating the future, often with that sense of fear, but also of pleasure. But again, on reflection, they are products of the mind. They're not real, therefore. So the past is a memory that you've filtered and registered and filed, and the future you're creating about possibilities, pleasure or otherwise, still a mental construct. We live in our mental constructs. The only time that we are consciously alive is now. Even 2 seconds ago is just a memory now. And you can note this for yourself, you probably already have. If you watch a beautiful sunset or are enraptured by a wonderful landscape, it's a special moment somehow. But the moment you say, that is beautiful, it no longer is an experience, but it becomes a labelled memory. It fades, the wonderfulness has gone. So therefore now is not in time, and in a sense it is not in space, it is eternal. So eternal does not mean lots of time, eternal means no time. In that eternity is oneness with all that is one, the reality connected to illusion, fully alive consciously. And in that sense it has the qualities of acceptance of what is now, an observer position of thought and emotion. And that observer position transforms everything. It is a surrendering to the now, a forgiveness, a letting go that is fully liberating. I'd like to quote a little from Practicing the Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. He is referring to those of us who are striving, as it were. And so rather almost controversially he was saying this: do not look for peace. Do not look for any other state than the one you are in now. Otherwise you will set up an inner conflict and unconscious resistance. Forgive yourself for not being at peace. The moment you completely accept your non-peace becomes transmuted into peace. Anything you accept fully will get you there, will take you into peace. This is the miracle of surrender. When you accept what is, every moment is the best moment. That is enlightenment. Again, you don't resist change by mentally clinging to any situation. Your inner peace does not depend on it. You abide in being, unchanging, timeless, deathless. And you are no longer dependent for fulfillment or happiness on the outer world of constantly fluctuating forms. At the level of being, all suffering is recognized as an illusion, because suffering is an identification with form. And further, when you are fully present and people around you manifest unconscious behavior, you won't feel the need to react to it, so you don't give it any reality. Your peace is so vast and deep. Anything that is not peace disappears into it as if it had never existed. And this breaks the karmic cycle of action and reaction. Animals, trees, flowers will feel your peace and respond to it. You teach through being, through demonstrating the peace of God. You become the light of the world, an emanation of pure consciousness. And so you eliminate suffering on the level of cause. You eliminate unconsciousness from the world. It's the end of those quotes. So in summary, the manifested world is an illusion in that it is different to what it appears to be. Relative reality is the perspective from which you view until you return to your source, the ultimate reality, now consciously. Thought is the creating method, but also the cause of illusion or distortions of reality. Calming the mind and thus seeing things clearly as they are is the way to reality. And you have the power to choose. Choose what you see and hear. Choose how you think, whether to love or to fear. And choose to live in the now or the past or the future. These are simple connecting methods. But most importantly, however, is to remember who you really are. A being from Source, still connected to the original thought that created you, choosing to have a physical experience, and helping Source to consciously explore its fuller potential. Wow.